just listening really well. And we kind of have an internal rule that if you hear something 3 times from 3 different people in 3 different conversations, that should pique your interest, because now that's not just someone's want or desire, that might actually become an industry-wide need.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com and grab some time with us. We're always here to help. Now, today we have I think all my episodes, I was going to say one of my favorite episodes, but they're all my favorites. It's kind of like choosing between your kids. And I have 4 kids, and I don't know that I can choose between any of them. But we have one of the Where They At Now episode, which is really fun for me because, it's, you kind of do the initial interview, meet the person, hear where they're at, how they got to where they're at today, but then you never really know where things go from there. So love having people back on and kind of getting that catch-up episode. So with that, we have Colby Tunick, and Colby is with Refocus AI. And he came on about 6-7 months ago, had a good conversation, kind of told us about his journey, and he's back on to kind of give us an update as to where he's at. So with that much as a short introduction, as opposed to my little bit longer introductions, welcome back on the podcast, Colby.
Hey, thanks for having me, Devin.
So before we dive into kind of what the last 6 months have been, why don't you take us back to kind of where you're at 6 months ago, what was going on, and then we'll kind of talk about how the last 6 months have gone.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we step in our time machine and, rewind to the middle of the pandemic, well, of course, 6 months ago, we were still on the height of the pandemic. For us at Refocus, we had just released our beta version of the product, and Refocus is a sales enablement product for people-to-people sales, and we answer 2 key questions. The first is, when exactly is someone going to purchase a product? And the second one is, what exact product or service are they going to be interested in that given time frame? And we were just kind of really honing in on that, from a product market fit standpoint. Shortly after we spoke, right around that time, we'd been in conversations with a couple of very, very very large prospective customers. We were actually able to close a couple of them. So, right around there, we actually were able to begin those conversations that have since, really helped us, go down the ski hill towards our success. And it's interesting to think 6 months ago is, right when we were starting to have those initial conversations. We also brought on some new staff members 6 months ago. We, revamped the website. We started our blog about 6 months ago. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's blog.refocusai.com. And we talk about everything from industry insights to digital transformation to software procurement, everything that we can potentially put out there to help our readership, which has since grown to 2,500 weekly subscribers, gain an edge on their competition and learn about the newest and greatest technology coming down the road. So that's that also started about 6 months ago. So it's kind of fun reflecting back on how busy we've been, and also the fact that it's only been 6 months. It kind of feels like it's been 2 or 3 years.
Oh, I think it's kind of like in dog years where, it's, a year in a startup is like 10 years at a normal job, because they always are running to catch your breath for that whole year. So I completely get that. So no, that was a great kind of where you guys were at 6 months ago. Now, I think one of the first things that we chatted a bit before the catching up was that you guys have now completed your first pilot, and you have another 5 pilots in the work. Is that right?
Yeah, we are. So we completed our first pilot with a national insurance brokerage. They have about 5,000 employees spread across the United States. We're now actually an international company. Our second pilot is with a Fortune 300 company. We're working with their office in Singapore. So it's just crazy to think that, we're when we talked 6 months ago, I thought we were a team of 4. Now we're a team of 7. But with a team of 7, we're an international company supporting multiple clients all around the world. And then we have we're working with another 4 or 5 companies right now with over $1 billion in annual recurring revenue. So it's really an exciting time for us.
No, that is exciting. It's always fun to grow and to see, hey, we had an idea, we thought it was a good idea, we put it out in the marketplace, and hey, it was a great idea. It's always kind of that when you initially get it launched, when you get it up and going, when you try and sell it, it's always a bit of question mark. Hey, is people going to think this is as good as I think it is? So that's awesome that you not only rolled out, had the first one that you rolled out, went through with a big company, but now you've had an opportunity to do additional pilots. And now,
Mhm.
one of the other things I think that we chatted a bit is you also, as you've gone through, got it up and running, did the first pilot, doing or working on getting other pilots,
Mhm.
you've also honed in on kind of what the value is to the customer. So give us a bit of an insight. How did you kind of, over the last 6 months, kind of figure out what to hone in on, how to hone in on it, and how has that gone?
Yeah, so you for a little bit of background, we started in September of 2019, so we're still relatively new kids on the block. And we really spent the first year growing from our initial hypothesis of where we could provide value for our clients. And we released a bunch of versions of the product in that time. We learned a lot of lessons, and ultimately, what it came down to was one, just listening really well. And we kind of have an internal rule that if you hear something 3 times from 3 different people in 3 different conversations, that should pique your interest, because now that's not just someone's want or desire, that might actually become an industry-wide need. Secondly, just really being out there, not just in terms of calling and emailing people and publishing a blog, but attending trade shows and conferences and competing in startup competitions and trying to learn about the business operations, take feedback from that, incorporate that back into your overall business strategy, revise your pricing and customer personas every couple months. And it's really just been constant iteration. If you had to sum up the last 6 months, last 9 months, last year, it would just be constant iteration. And I think that's been kind of confusing. I know I've had conversations with people on their team, and they're kind of like, I have whiplash. We just spoke 4 weeks ago, like we were going to talk about the company this way, and now you're telling me we're going to talk about it differently. I'm like, yes, we are. And here's why.
Now,
Uh,
one question, and you started to touch on it, but I'll dive into it just a bit deeper, is when you get in, there's multiple ways to get customer feedback. You can do everything from watching the website and doing hotspots, or where they're clicking and monitoring that. You can get emails, you can get ask for reviews, you can give them a phone call and dial them up.
mhm.
You can do multiple things. And so when you're doing all of that, did you try all of that? Are you implementing all of that? As you found one way that's better than another to get the feedback, or kind of how have you gone about honing that, knowing what to hone in on, and then honing the message?
Sure. So we were actually able to settle fairly well into the value that the product provides, and I think that comes down to just having a great advisory board. But how you talk about it, that's really where the rubber meets the road. And you can have the best product that actually solves the need, but if you can't articulate that in 9 words in 5 seconds, all of those prospective customers that might be interested are going to shut down and hang up the phone. So what it really came down to was, and I hate to say it, but there were just a lot of people in the industry that were gracious enough to bear through perhaps the conversations that were less articulate, or less to the point, or not as fluent as they should have been, and were able to, after hearing it, almost synthesize back. They were like, you said this, but what I'm hearing is this sort of thing, and be like, yo, yeah, that's what we mean. And then over time, actually adapt the customer language as the sales proposition, as the sales language. And I think that's also been very effective, is just learning how the customers themselves think about your product and articulating that back to them. It's one, it's very rewarding to them, but two, it makes what you're doing very clear.
Mm. No, and I think that's certainly a great lesson learned. And I think it's one thing that makes products successful. It's, you always put it out in the wild, and I don't care how good you've tested the marketplace before you put the product out. There's going to be things you didn't consider. And I always kind of joke, but it's there's a lot too. So I've done several different startups and have been in the software arena, And it's incredible the things that you don't think of until you actually put it out there. The way that people do it, I always joke is, it's hard to make something idiot proof because they keep making better idiots, in the sense that there's
Sure.
always things that you don't consider. And I'm not calling customers idiots, don't take that the wrong way by any means. I'm more saying that there are things that you would have never thought that people would have tried this, that have done this, they would have, or interacted with it this way, they would have tried to do everything else. And until you really try that, until you really get that understanding, you're never going to fully be able to iterate on the product. But you can't put it out in the marketplace and then just simply say, oh, it's done. We built it. It's good to go. Don't worry about it. That's not a good place. So I love the iteration. Now, one of the other things you mentioned, just kind of diving through, is you made a couple hires. It sounds like you had a couple key hires. Tell us a little bit about that project or process. Was it a fluid process? You loved it and it was a perfect thing? It was arduous and, time consuming. And it was, because that's always, you start out as a very small group with a startup. You have a few key individuals. A lot of times it's people you trust, it's people you worked with before, and then you reach a point to where now you have to expand out. It's no longer just that key group, but you're saying, hey, we have other needs, we have other people, we need to grow the team. And I've gone through where I've rushed through way too quickly to make hires, and they haven't been good hires, and I learned my lesson. And there's other ones where I took my time, slowed down, and we've had absolutely great hires. I've been on both sides of the spectrum, and you learn those lessons. So how did the hiring process, as you're looking for those hires, how'd it go for you?
Well, I think it comes down to when anyone starts a company, the first people they normally look at to start a company are people within their immediate network. And that is mostly from a security standpoint, because if you've known someone for a couple of years outside of a work setting, you pretty much can understand how effective, like benchmark, how effective are they going to be as a coworker now? I have heard a million horror stories of someone who, they go and they find someone they've never met before. They supposedly both share a common idea, and they go to try to build a company together. 6 months later, one founder is doing all the work and the other founders, mowing lawns or doing something not related at all to what the mission that the two or three set out to do. And I've also heard stories where that works extremely well, but it's kind of a mixed bag. One of the things I have learned, and I think the team has learned from this journey, is you just have to start. And especially when you begin, fresh, I have an idea, there's no product built. So if it's a physical hardware sort of product, nothing built. If there's software, there's nothing that anyone can click and touch on. It's important to just get a team together to get something out the door. And then the thing is, the more mature the product is, the higher quality people you'll be able to attract. I have a wonderful team, Chief Operations Officer, Operating Officer Elisha Chang, who's been with us from the beginning. Our Chief Technology Officer actually had to step down, went through a major life change, and that was a major shift. And in their place, we were able to attract a 35-year, PhD machine learning expert, worked with, multiple Fortune 50 companies, for lead and demand generation, pricing and revenue forecasting, Dr. Nassar Hundawal. And I just have to say that if we had set out in the beginning to attract someone of his caliber, we wouldn't have been able to. And one, that's because we wouldn't have been far enough along to provide, someone of that level of certainty that what we're working on is actually wanted by the market. And two, we wouldn't have probably been able to articulate our value proposition in a way that would have been attractive to someone of, a later senior hire would require. And so for the people that are listening in, it's more about just getting going. But then, I say this because especially if they're personal relationships, you want to be respectful of that. But you do have to be. I think the best word for it is just ruthless when it comes to hiring, right? You always need the best team. And sometimes the team you started with is not the team that's going to get you across the finish line. That can be, both a team decision, like, hey, this person isn't working out, or it could be mutual, like, hey, this just isn't working for me. And every step of the way, as you continue to grow and as you continue to reach, key KPIs, key revenue numbers, it's easier and easier to attract people of higher caliber. Now we're in the place where we are, making early revenue, about to make early revenue, early recurring revenue. And so making sure that we had enough of the cap table free in order to, attract those people if we can't pay them, multiple hundreds of $1,000s a year was also key. So, kind of two lessons there. One, get going, but two, make sure you have enough cap table available so that when you get to the point where you really need to start hiring, seasoned key industry leaders and bring them onto the team, you can attract them, not just with your mission, but also with your amount of equity you can offer them.
No. No, and I definitely agree. And just as a quick reminder for those, what a cap table is, basically a cap table is, in kind of a quick summary, it's ability to give them shares or equity, and there's different ways of doing it depending how you have to do it. Shares, equity, or other incentives such that when they come on, they may not have necessarily as high of salary, but they have that, hey, if the business does well, you'll have an ownership, or you'll have a stake in the business such that you can get that reward as it prospers. So just as a complete aside, but no, I completely agree. And one of the other things I thought was interesting, so I have a lot of books that I love, favorite books, but one of my favorite books is it's by Mark Randolph, which is the founder of Netflix. And the original, Steve Hastings, the one that everybody knows now, but he wasn't the original founder. Mark Randolph was, and it was That Will Never Work. And great book. You should definitely read it. Not plugging it, I just love the book. But one of the things that they kind of talked about is the reason it shifted over from Mark Randolph to Steve Hastings, and they also had to shift over from some initial employees to new employees, is because as a startup, a lot of times you start with a generalist. In other words, you need people that can do a lot of things fairly well, but they aren't specialized in any given area. As a business continues to grow and mature, a lot of times you shift from, hey, we need a whole bunch of or several generalists to some specialists, and those specialists can do just some areas very well, and they may not do everything well, but do some things very well. And so as you shift that, to your point, is kind of, hey, there's sometimes you start out thinking we need, these type of people, and then, hey, now we need these experts in the industry, we need other things. And so it's always interesting how that evolution occurs with each startup, and it occurs over different timelines, different sizes, different types, different or ways that it shows that, but it's kind of has that same outcome within each business as you continue to grow. So I definitely understand and think that makes a lot of sense. Well, so now we've kind of gone through, and you've done, so you've talked about you're doing your pilots, you've made some key hires, you're continuing to grow. You've honed in your value proposition. I think one of the other things you mentioned is also getting ready to do a venture raise as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So we will soon be going out, and we've already started to soft circle some of that investment to do our initial raise, which we've decided it's a pre-seed. I think that's one of the difficult things right now with startups. One is you need a product and you need users, and then what you really have to do is find a firm that, most firms either like, we accept pre-revenue companies or we don't, right? But as long as you have a product, and you have people using it on a regular basis, you're okay. But there's a lot of confusion and ambiguity in the market right now about what the titles of the raise mean. Right.
I think that there's so many different titles. It's pre-seed versus seed versus Series A, Series B, Series A.1. I mean, it just seems like, and then it seems like every time people just come up with new titles to make it so it sounds new and different.
Seed 1, seed 2, it's a bridge. It's, it's just, yeah. So originally we thought we were going to do a seed. Now we've spoken to a couple of, key trusted venture capitalists who are not interested in working with, so we can, expect. And I think that's the other thing, as a founder, you're going to speak to a lot of investors. And if you can find a couple that, don't actually invest in your market, but are reliable and you can trust them, they'll provide you a lot of great feedback on both your raise material and your pitch and, strategy and things like that. And I think that's really key. I didn't know that necessarily going in. Like, go find 2 or 3 investors you can talk to that just like you as a human, but they don't have that conflict of interest. And because of that, we've since decided to call it a pre-seed. But that was we talked about, like, we're going to do a friends and family and a seed and a pre-seed or a post-seed, or it was like, it got so confusing. But the funny thing is the dollar amount of money we were raising never changed. It's always been the same amount of money we want to raise. However, it's just really the amount of expectation that investors have going into that raise. It's also, there's a lot of people out there with raises, a lot of early stage VCs, venture capitalists, that they're okay writing you $100,000 check if you want to just raise $500,000. But it's really weird, these days, and with the amount of the cost to build a functioning software product, the cost to support customers on a functioning software product. And there's actually a bit of a gap in the space between like, raising $500,000 and raising $1 million and more, because the amount of traction and KPIs you have to raise over $1 million are, far more significant than if you want $500,000. But if you look at what $500,000 gets you in terms of burn rate and key hires and product development and eventually revenue numbers, right? Everything comes back to revenue. You raise $500,000 to get the X number. It pales in comparison. And honestly, in a lot of situations, if you're not just, two people, the core founding team, and you need to go hire some consultants, may even be insufficient. So just, for those listening in, I would just have you think critically about what your actual funding needs are, how you're actually going to use the money, and ultimately how long that money is going to last and what revenue that money will get you to. If you can answer those 4 questions, you'll be in good shape to strategize your next raise.
No, and I love that. And, it's interesting. I think it's just as hard to raise a friends and family round as a Series A and a Series B. And it's not like, oh, now we've made it, this round is a piece of cake, and sometimes it is, or if you get the lead investor, it can make it easier for that. But it's always, it's always a chore. And it's kind of like, selling, raising 500,000 is the same as raising 100,000 and is as difficult as raising 10 million, depending on where the company's at. So I think that definitely makes sense. So, well, awesome. Well, so now we've kind of walked through, we've done everything from you're currently in a raise, and definitely encourage those that are either accredited investors or investors or other people who want to get involved, they can reach out to you. But you've also refocused, you've honed your message, you've honed your business. Anything else as we kind of wrap towards the end of the episode, anything else you've done over the last 6 months that would be interesting or that otherwise people should know about or think about as they're doing their business?
Yeah, and I think this is just kind of the industry. Software is very cyclical, but it's also very buzzword trendy heavy. So we have a lot of people we speak with that don't actually understand what machine learning is, and there's a lot of companies that talk about machine learning perhaps incorrectly. There's a lot of great companies out there that are actually using some sort of machine learning, artificial intelligence to drive value. And one of the struggles for us has been trying to say like, no, we're actually using real machine learning to generate these, real-time sales insights. And, we have a lot of people that ask, well, like, oh, we spoke to this other company the other day and they say they're doing something similar, but then you kind of dig into it a little deeper and, they're doing optimization or they're doing some sort of robotic process automation, RPA, which aren't machine learning sort of derivatives. And one of the things we've had to be really cognizant about is how we talk about both ourselves and our expertise and our skill set is to really make it known that just AI and machine learning is a very specialized skill set. It is difficult to do, and not everyone that talks about it is actually doing it in the market. That was a kind of a challenge that when we spoke 6 months ago I didn't expect. And it's become really prevalent now because we're talking with, such large companies that are being approached all the time by companies like ourselves, to be quite frank. And, there's kind of this confusion about like, what is machine learning? How does it actually work? How is this different than, a monkey in a black box, just like spitting out recommendations? I think one of the things that's very helpful, not only for investors, but for, co-founders, for startups, for people that are just interested in learning about machine learning is to, just pick up a book and try to understand, maybe even try to code some of it themselves to figure out how it works. And that sort of practical hands-on knowledge, I think is beneficial to anyone who's interested in AI. But the other kind of key caveat to that is machine learning is not a silver bullet. And we've actually had to turn a lot of companies down because they're not either in the place where they have the data necessary, or what they want actually doesn't require machine learning. And for both those reasons, both very valid reasons, we've had to say to some very large potential checks, I'm sorry, we just can't work with you, or, we're actually not the right fit, and we don't want to, set ourselves up to not meet your expectations. So saying no, I think ultimately saying no and being really strong in what we do well, those are kind of 2 lessons that we've learned over the last 6 months that, if you would ask me 6 months ago, what do you think some of your struggles will be? I would have never have predicted.
Mm. No, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom there. So now as we start to wrap up, I always like, where they, normal episodes always have the two questions I ask at the end of each podcast. And with the where are they at now, I always like to change it up just a bit. So the question I always like is, as you go along your journey, on the one sense, the farther you get in, you learn a lot, you pivot, you adjust, you adapt, and you do that. You also sometimes, I think, when you initially as an entrepreneur, you're a bit naive, and I think most entrepreneurs are, otherwise you never get started. And then you also you don't know what you don't know, so to speak. And as you get farther into your journey, you get less naive and you learn more, which is a benefit. But it also can kind of create those fears of now you know what you should be working. Now you know what
Mhm.
keeps you up at night. So with that, along your journey so far, what's your biggest fear, and how have you dealt with it?
Well, I don't think anyone should start a journey like having a startup if their dreams aren't bigger than their fears, because then they'll have nothing to keep pulling them forward or pushing them forward or working towards. But the biggest fear of it's a difficult question. I think it's a very valid question, and it's kind of twofold. It's one, is something going to happen in the market, in the global economy, that you know dries up all of these budgets that currently we're working with, right? Because if another '08 stock market crash or another tech bubble happens, chances are people are going to say, we just, sorry, like, we love what you're doing, but we don't have a budget for it. And that's really, that we've never gotten that. We've never had someone tell us, yeah, we don't have a budget for what you're doing. We've actually gotten really positive feedback. If you hear that, that normally means you're not solving the problem. But after a tech burst, bubble, something like that, it's very possible that these budgets could drive up. And of course, that has nothing to do with us. That's kind of an external fear. As the world kind of returns to a new normal after the pandemic too, it's just trying to make sure that that continues to happen, and that there's not some sort of next wave that derails how businesses are thinking about operating in the budgets and their revenue forecasts. But the second one is, and I think this is perpetual. It's what if something happens to the team, right? I mean, and this isn't like someone just goes off the deep end, or has a stress attack. I joke with my co-founders that we actually get stress equity, stress equity. uh, and people are like, oh yes, stock equity is great. I'm like, no, you literally get equity for stress. Like, you literally just have to try to, it's stressful. And so it's a matter of, well, what happens if someone goes through a major life event, or a family member gets sick, or you know
Mm-hmm.
some sort of life-changing event, which is, unfortunately, they do happen. And suddenly you're kind of left with a gap again. And we already went through this once with when our CTO unexpectedly resigned due to that significant life change. And
Mm-hmm.
we parted on very good terms, and we only wish that person the best. And very fond memories of the time working together. But suddenly you go from having a strong team that you have all of your gaps filled, to suddenly you have a big hole. And except last time when this happened, you didn't have Fortune 500 customers saying, okay, you promised me this, where is it? So I guess that for me is probably my biggest personal fear, is like, what happens if there's the composition of the team changes, and how long would it take to find someone with the skill set and experience to fill that? And of course, you can handle that a myriad of ways, from succession planning to coaching, to just regular check-ins and saying, hey, is there anything on the roadmap or your horizon that I should be aware of? But life does happen, and it's those unexpected curveballs that ultimately keeps this interesting.
Mm. No, and I think that there's a lot to unpack there, and we won't dive into all of it. But I think that there's a lot of validity. But I think even the things that you learn that are out of your control, and you kind of touched on that, the economy, or what if things they're saying they are a great product, we just can't afford it, or those type of things are ones that you start to learn and say, okay, I just figured everybody buy my product if it's a great product and I make a great thing. And then you start to learn. But I think there's a lot of fears in there. But I think it's also one where a lot of times we don't you tend to not want to focus on the fears or even talk about it in the community, because then it makes you show like, hey, everything's not absolutely perfect. I don't have everything figured out. It's not all just going exactly as perfectly as I could ever plan. And I think that, you have to have the foresight to say, hey, I'm going to have fears. I'm going to have things that I'm not going to be able to control, or haven't thought of, that I'm going to have to encounter and going to have to figure out how to deal with. And so rather than just kind of pretending like they aren't there, recognizing them, and then figuring out how to deal with them is a great thing. So I love hearing a little bit about that. Well, as we wrap up, then it's been a pleasure to have you on again. But if people want to be a customer, a client, they want to be an investor on your current round, they want to be an employee, they want to be your next best friend, any or all the above, how do they reach out, connect up with you, and find out more?
Absolutely. Well, they can reach out to me through our website, which is just refocusai.com. You can drop us a line there. You can also email me. It's colby@refocusai.com. And always happy to speak to someone who's just interested in kind of innovation and product. I don't want to say that we're a success story yet because we still have a million miles to go. But, if someone is just getting started and they say, like, how do I take this idea I have and, what's the next step, right? How do I take my first step on that journey? Always happy to help someone think through those steps there as well.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, find out more, support you guys, and any or all of the above. So thank you again, Colby, for coming on. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you listeners, if you have your own journey to tell, whether you're telling your 6-month journey where you're at, or you're just starting out on your journey, we'd love to hear love to share your journey. So feel free to go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the podcast. 2 more things as a listener. 1, make sure to click subscribe in your podcast player so you know when all of our awesome episodes come out. 2, leave us a review so everybody else knows out or everybody else can find out about all of our awesome episodes. Last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else with your business, feel free to reach out to us by going to strategymeeting.com, grabbing some time with us to chat. Well, thanks again, Colby. And as always, wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks, Devin. You too.